it's time to do some binding, and I am sitting on my sofa, and I thought I would try to see. The boys are gone and I'm here all by myself, and so I was going to do a video here on the sofa. So I have my little bag that my friend Tammy made me. I use this for my binding, and I got all of these out from my thread stash to see what I liked, and I think I'm going to do that light one. These are all kind of too orange, so we're going to put those back in there. And I did another video recently on binding, but I did bias binding, which is basically the same concept, but I did a very curved edge. So this is going to be the first time that I have done just regular binding. So I always press it, and then I take a few pins and I pin it right on the line that I sewed my binding on. I line that up. I like to put my clips where the flat side is up and the colored side is facing down. I just think it holds it better. Could be just me, but that's what I do. And so I usually do about that much to start off. So now open this thread, and the needles that I use are the Lori Holt needles. They're in a little tube, and they're the Lori Holt binding needles, and I will link them down below, but they come in little tubes like this. And one is the small ones, and the other one I have all the mediums in. So small is kind of what I'm into these days. I have a couple that are here ready for me, but these are the ones that I use. So I'm using the small Lori Holt one. It has a little purple end on it. And I'm going to take that thread out. Oh, I also need to get my scissors. So I use my little Ginger scissors, and I work on the back side of the quilt when I do my binding. So we're going to take that off, and then I'm going to snip a new fresh end and get under the light over here. I'll be right back. If you can't see it, the light's kind of right here. So I'm just going to thread my needle and then pull it through. And so I usually extend my arm. I probably do way too much thread than you're supposed to, and so I just leave it single. So I don't have a knot on the one end, on either end actually. I just thread it through the needle. I leave a little hanging, and then the other end goes down here. So I don't put a knot on the end. I start it, and this may be very hard to see since there's all this blending fabric and yarn, thread. Wrong sport. Okay, so I loop it around 3 times, and then I make a little knot at the end. So once I do it 3 times, then I go back through the thread and I make a little knot. And that's how I start off. So I don't tie a knot in the bottom of it. And then I tuck it in, and then I fold my binding over to where my stitch line is. And then I use my finger to kind of hold it as I go. And so what you're doing is you're pushing the needle through the fabric down below and the batting, but not the front. And that will give you your your little seam that will be hidden and nested. And so this is what I do. So I'm using Aurifil 50 weight thread and the Lori Holt binding needle. And my favorite thimble is this Clover. You wear a small because I got pretty small fingers, but I use the Clover one. These are my favorites. And so it doesn't really matter where you start. I like to work from the back side so that I can see where my fold goes over to where the stitch line is better. Because if you don't keep your edge right on there, sometimes from the front side it'll start to look kind of rippled. So I always work from the back. I know I've seen a lot of videos of people that work from the front, and to me that just seems backwards, but whatever works for you. So try it both ways, see what you like. I think one of the other things that I'm going to mention is that a lot of you do starch your fabric, and that is wonderful and it's great, and you should do whatever works for you. However, when I do binding, if it is starched like this fabric, to me it is much more difficult to work with. It's kind of like trying to fold cardboard. I mean, I say that lovingly, but I mean, I understand the starching for the piecing and the back and to keep everything shrinking at the same rate and all of that. I understand why it's done, but from a binding perspective, I prefer my binding to not have any starch on it. It makes my hand sticky, and I just feel like it's just harder to fold and maneuver. So that's my little 2 cents on starching binding. Again, same thing as anything with quilting. Use whatever works for you. And so I'm just trucking along here. And again, I'm just putting my needle in. So here's where my thread's coming out. And so I'm putting my needle in below through the backing and the batting, but not through to the front. And then I'm pulling it out. And as I get to each clip, I just pull it out and I move it backwards. And then when I run out of clips, then I readjust them and start again. So I know that the video that I did last time, it sort of made it look like the stitches were really far apart. So my stitch is, I would say, 1/8 of an inch maybe apart. They're not quite 1/4 of an inch. And I think that that is also personal preference. I've seen people that keep the stitches very, very close together. I have done hand binding for a long time, and I have a lot of my own personal quilts that have been hand bound, that have been washed a zillion times, and I have never seen any that have come apart. So knock on wood, this distance that I'm doing has always seemed to be just fine. So again, from one fingernail to another fingernail is what I'm doing, which is probably, like I said, about 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so we're gonna get onto the corner here. And so since this fabric is very starched, I pressed it. When I sewed it on, I showed you a little while ago, when I pressed it from the front, I also folded it over and pressed it onto the back. And that makes my little mitered corner a little bit easier to do. So I'm getting ready to do this one. And so the mitered corner is already done for me because I ironed it. So that, I don't even really have to clip it. So I'm going to show you how I do my corners. Okay, so as I'm coming up to my corner, I pull this side away, and then I go up underneath, just like we've been doing. And I take my needle until I get to my original stitch line. So there's the stitch line where I attached this side here. So there's that stitch line, and I go up into that part so that I'm even with the stitch line. And then I do another stitch right there, and then I do another stitch coming out at the same place. And then I do the same thing as I did before. I just put it through that loop again, and it makes a little knot. And then I stick it up through there, about there. And then I pull it out. And so that gets me so that now I'm going this direction. So now I fold over this side, and I can take my needle and I can put it through my binding at the mitered edge, and then it will come right out on the bottom. And then I will stick it right through and do a little tiny chomp. And if you're using matching thread, I always match my thread to my binding. I know some people try to, it just sort of depends, I guess, but I do normally try to match my thread to my binding, because the corners, the mitered corners, look much better with matching thread. And so the first several little chomps I make, I try to do those maybe a little bit smaller than these over here as I'm doing the corners. And so there's the corner. There's what it looks like. And so then I just keep going and going until I get to my next corner. And I'm almost out of, my thread's going to be ready to replace soon. So I'm going to keep going until it's time to replace my thread, and then I'll show you how I do that. And so this thumb is very important in my binding. A lot of times on my fingernail, you'll see these scratch marks on the top of my fingernail if I've been doing a lot of binding, because I kind of come up right in front of where my fingernail is. So I kind of push it down with my fingernail, and then I come back up right in front of it. And so I'm still making sure, sometimes where I clip my binding, it'll go a little bit farther past my stitch line, just because sometimes when I'm doing the clipping, I don't really pay that much attention, like exactly. And so I do kind of make sure that I don't get too far in, because it's easy to start going farther past the stitch line as you get going and pulling with your thumb. So I go until I can't. So if you see, there's how much thread I have left. And so I'm going to do probably 3 or 4 more, and then I'll be done with this piece of thread. And if you're a beginner and you're just trying to learn, at this point, I would probably just replace your thread until you get a little more practice in. Okay, so now I have that much thread with this little tail. And the way that I tie off is, so here's where my fingernail is, where the last stitch. And so I'm going to put my needle up underneath there so it comes out pretty much at the same exact stitch. And then there's a little loop right here, and I'm going to go through the loop, and that makes a little knot. And then I kind of do another little knot. So I make a little loop with my finger, I stick the needle through that little loop, and then I pull it so that there is where the thread meets the edge right there, and then I put my fingernail over it and I pull it. And that makes another little knot. And then I put the needle directly underneath where that is, and I have it come out here and pull it all the way out and then pull it. And then it makes that little knot that we made invisible. You don't see it anymore. Then I stick my needle in there to hold it, or you can use one of your snazzy needle minders. And then, so I don't take my thread off the spool. I leave it on the spool, go to the end. Let me see if I can see it well enough. There we go. And then I just thread it until my end comes out to about this far. And then I trim it down here. And like I said, sometimes I leave it too long, and when you do that, you can get some snags when it's too long. But we're gonna try it anyway. And so then when I start my new thread again, I take my binding and I push it back just a little bit. So this is where we ended. And then I put it through and I go all the way until the thread is almost through. So there's just a little bit left right there. And then I go back through and make another little chomp. Oh, and I'm stuck on a clip down on the bottom there. So there's 2 chomps, and then I do a 3rd chomp. And then when I have my little loop left over, right there, I have a loop. Now I'm gonna stick it through the loop to make one of my little knots. And then I pull my thread all the way back to where I ended. I stick my needle in right where I ended, and I make a little tiny chomp. And then the first, I don't know, probably 5 that I do, I make smaller. So go up through the batting and the backing, and then come out at the very edge of your binding. Okay, so now I've done all of those little stitches nice and small. And so now I know that it's kind of in there, and now I will start making them not quite so small. So when your thread is kind of long, just make sure when you first start in your thread, if your thread maybe is just a little bit too long, just go slow, because as you're pulling it through right there, see how it kind of starts to get it can make a little knot right there, and that's a real pain to try to unknot. So just go slow as you're watching it, and sometimes I even stick my finger kind of through it or on it, and it really only does that when it's too long, or like when it's the longest. And once it starts to get a little shorter, I don't usually have too much trouble. So you're putting your needle in basically right where your stitch line is. So that will make your end of your binding and the end of this, it'll make it exactly the same. So that when you look at it from the back, it's the same width as the front. All right, so I'm gonna put a couple more clips. I'm gonna do this other corner. And then you know everything I know. Okay. So I'm making some chicken in the pressure cooker because my son is at football practice. He has his first scrimmage this weekend. So he's at football practice until like 9:30. So he asked me to make him some casserole. I make this casserole that I do chicken and noodles, and then that's got peas in it, and then I sprinkle the sour cream and onion Ruffles potato chips on the top of it. I crumple them all up and sprinkle them on the top, and it's one of his favorite meals. So that is what I've been requested to make this evening. So I'm gonna go tend to my chicken in a minute. So I did get a little bit of a snag, and I just pulled it out with the needle and then pulled it back through. I'm also doing laundry in the other room. I'm wondering if you can hear my laundry. Anyway, even if you can, it's kind of like hanging out with me in the living room. So this is sort of what I do. I didn't turn on the television because I didn't want that background noise, but usually I sit and watch some TV. I'm not a real big TV person. I don't watch a lot of TV. My husband usually controls the remote, so I just watch what he watches normally, but I love to watch Married at First Sight. It's a ridiculous show where these people don't know each other and they get married. And then they have to stay married for like 8 weeks. And then they decide at the end of the 8 weeks if they want to stay married. So I like that. I like the psychology behind watching the people. They're young. Most of them are pretty young and get married for the first time, and watching all their expectations. And so I kind of get a kick out of what the human mind does, and I guess the heart also. But that's kind of a fun show that I like to watch. But the season just ended not long ago, and I haven't started a new one. My son and I watched Stranger Things a couple of summers ago when it was starting. But I haven't finished that one yet. I started it, and I haven't finished it. All right, so we're almost to another corner. I'm in the thread club at the Fat Quarter Shop, so once a month they send me those little spools. I can't remember. I think there's 4 or maybe 5 of these spools that come every week or every month. And so I've been in that thread club for a long time because it gives me a lot of variety of different threads for binding, since I do so much binding, normally speaking. Took a little binding break over the summer so I could spend some more time with my kiddo, but summer has come to an end around here. Okay, so in the corner, remember we went right to the stitch line, and then we went in again right at the stitch line. I'm kind of snagged there. And come out until I have a little bit left over, and I've made myself a little loop, and then stick the needle through the loop to make the little knot. And then I stick the needle up underneath, and I come out up towards the top. Then fold my binding down, and then I stick my needle back in and come out. So when you do that, you're chomping through all of that fabric there, and then that keeps your mitered corner nice and neat. And then those first couple are really small, little tiny stitches, and that will keep the ends more secure. Okay, so there we have that. Let's move this out of the way. So there's our little mitered corner. Sometimes I put my clip over the end of it just for some added fun, to make sure that it's nice and squished on there. Okay, so y'all know how to do binding now. It's one of my favorite parts of the quilting. I get to look at my quilting and admire the pantographs and check it out. I really do enjoy doing binding. I used to hate it though. I sometimes even cried. Okay, so I'm done with this last piece here. I'm gonna tie off one more time and then we're gonna call it quits. And sometimes when I iron it, if I didn't get it ironed good, like I said, because this is so starched, sometimes it's harder to get it to go over to where the stitch line is. Okay, this is the last one. Now we're gonna stitch it in there. I put my fingernail right there to hold it, and then I go up underneath and I come out pretty much where I went in right there. And actually, I was talking and I didn't do what I was going to show you. So, and then I pull that through, make the little loop and pull it through, and that makes your little knot. And I broke it. And it's okay because it's knotted. But I will show you, since we had a little mishap, what I will do. The quilt is loving getting all of the attention. All right, so I'll pull that back through. And I'll make a little cut it off. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll start over here, and I'm going to try not to pull that apart. I'm going to start over here, do the same thing. I do 1 stitch, 2 stitches, and then 3 stitches. And then go back through the loop to make a knot. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it past, up underneath past that where we broke it off. And that's going to go right through there. And then I'm going to go kind of back over it. And then I will do the same thing that I was going to just do. I'm just going to get to the end, make myself a little loop, and kind of tack it down. And then just keep going. So it just did that extra little tack just to kind of keep it from popping up if it should. Since this is a table topper and it's not like it's going to get a lot of snuggling, so it should be just fine. But that is hand binding. So I'm going to finish the end of this, and then you'll get to see it when Kimberly shows it on the live stream, and you'll get to see all the behind the scenes that it takes to get it all done. All right, so thanks a bunch for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you will subscribe. It's a pretty new channel, and so I'm trying to make as many videos as I can make time for. And so I would love for you to subscribe and come back and hang out with me again. Thanks a bunch and have a good night.